Does your screenplay or story feel flat and uninspired? If it does, perhaps you're wondering if it's because you're using too much structure. Maybe this structure is stifling your creativity. My dear storyteller, I've been there. Staring at the blank pages of a script that feels like it's going nowhere. The characters aren't popping, the plot feels predictable, and you start blaming the one thing that's supposed to help you. Structure. Oh, maybe it's too rigid, maybe I'm following it too closely and that's why everything feels so bland and predictable. But what if I told you the problem isn't too much structure, it's that you do not have enough structure? So in this video, we're going to tackle the myth that structure makes your story formulaic and boring. Trust me, once you see a structure that really works, it'll unlock your creativity rather than stifle it. I developed a story structure that helped me write, package, and fund Dirty Boy, my first feature that made it all the way to a gala screening in Cannes, and it's also the structure that helped me win Gold Prize at the PAGE Screenplay Awards with my feature GUNN. I also used this same structure to write my first novel, The Partisan, available now on Amazon. Links below. So let's break it down. You wouldn't say, oh, this building is so boring because they use blueprints, would you? Now, these architectural wonders stand tall because they were built on a solid foundation. And I bet the foundations actually of the Sistine Chapel and the foundations of Notre Dame are quite similar. But the buildings themselves are definitely unique and not boring in the slightest. Foundations are like the structure of your story. Because look, we're not building sandcastles, are we? We're trying to construct epic towers, stories that last in the imagination. But a story without a great solid structure, it's like a church with no foundation. A few cute spires, but a little bit of stress on it, it'll crumble fast. So when writers tell me too much structure makes my story predictable, what they're really saying is that they don't know how to use structure effectively. Because think about it, we go into a romantic comedy, we know the leads are getting together, right? Is that predictability? Yes, sure it is. But does it make the movie bad? No. Because the difference is in the execution. When Harry Met Sally and Some Like It Hot both have solid rom-com structures, but they're not dull, and they're not at all similar. Predictability in the hands of a good storyteller working within a solid structure feels inevitable, not boring. Because a skilled storyteller, if he's observing the traditional structure of a rom-com, simply has to make sure that the leads get together in a surprising and satisfying way. Let's look at thrillers. Take Nolan's films, Inception, Memento. These films are structured so tightly, beat for beat, the plots are tight. But are the stories predictable? Absolutely not. It's the twists, it's the stakes, it's the execution. That's what keeps you on the edge of your seat. So the next time someone tells you that structure makes things predictable, remind them that structure's the roadmap. And when people say too much structure, they're often masking a different issue. It's a lack of imagination in the premise of the tale. So if you've got a boring, seen it all before premise with flat characters, well, all the structure in the world isn't going to save your story from death by bland. But a bold, wild, unique premise within a tight structure, that's storytelling gold. Here's another thing, right? I don't think writers need fewer rules. They need more rules, more rigor, more guidelines. Why? Because the rules are what force you to dig deep, to innovate. Structure isn't holding you back, it's pushing you to go further. And it's allowing you to work with a bolder, more unique premise. So this is the structure I used to write GUNN, the script that won gold at the 2023 PAGE Awards. The structure is tight, it's classic. And if you want to have a look at this structure template and try it for yourself, then make sure you download my free guide, which includes that very structure template for you to build your own story upon. Links in the description below. The premise of GUNN is actually quite simple, yet it's also wild and crazy. A punch-drunk Scottish fisherman with almost supernatural powers versus Odin-worshipping neo-Viking psychopaths who've kidnapped his daughter and taken her to their lair, which is an abandoned North Sea oil rig. I mean, it's It's wild, right? It's almost ridiculous, one might say. But here's the secret. It's not just the interesting premise that made it work. It was the way I structured that idea. Every twist, every reversal and turning point in this structure is mined for maximum drama. And you know what? It's the exact same structure I used for Dirty Boy, which screened to a full house at Cannes earlier this year and has been selling out film festivals all over the world since. So GUNN and Dirty Boy are two very different cinematic stories, but the one thing they have in common: a bold premise, tightly structured. Create big, bold, surprising characters and big, bold, surprising situations, but structure them into an intricate paradigm. Structure is not about limiting your creativity, it's about giving it the proper foundation it needs to soar. Now, of course, a detailed, rigorous structure isn't worth squat if your premise is dull. And this is where so many writers fall flat. They focus so much then on hitting the structural beats that they forget the other foundations of any great story, and that's the premise. You can have the most perfectly structured screenplay in the world, but if your premise is bland, yeah, your story will be too. And you know when you've come up with a truly exciting premise because it infects your every thought, doesn't it? It grabs you by the throat and it doesn't let go. It's a concept that sparks your imagination, that makes you sit up and say, oh man, I need to see how this plays out. I challenge the screenwriters and filmmakers that I mentor to come up with the most outlandish premise that they can. See, my belief is that truly unique cinematic stories need to be so bold, so unforgettable from the very beginning. And then when writers develop that bold premise, then that maybe even scares them a little bit, they tend to find that when it's constrained within a very taut structure, magic happens. So what Dirty Boy and GUNN have in common are grand themes, complex protagonists, and truly fearsome villains, and a tight structure. In The Matrix, the premise is a world where reality is a simulation, and it's a mind-blowing premise on its own, but it's the bold premise guided along within a rigorous structure that makes it a classic. The hero's journey, the carefully plotted reversals, the escalating stakes, they're all part of a meticulously crafted structure that takes that killer premise and turns it into a cinematic landmark. Without structure, well, The Matrix would just be a jumble of cool ideas with no coherence, no impact really. But with structure, it's a masterpiece. So I hope you see that structure is not about limiting your creativity, it's about giving it the proper foundation it needs. Another example, Tarantino. Tarantino didn't throw away structure when he wrote Pulp Fiction, did he? He mastered it, then he played with it. And that's why this non-linear narrative still works. It's built on a solid foundation, the same way Mementos works. In fact, I don't know the story behind how Tarantino wrote Pulp Fiction, but I wouldn't be surprised if he planned it out linearly, act by act, and then deconstructed it once all of his beats were in place. But if you know different, then please let me know in the comments. I don't know for sure. So let's destroy and bury this myth once and for all, shall we? Structure doesn't make your story boring. It's either a lack of structure or a weak premise that makes your story feel flat. Both must be present. So you want to level up your storytelling? You don't need to tear down the walls, you really need to build stronger ones. You need to refine your central idea, your premise, make it exciting, unforgettable, and then embrace structure to see your story evolve from formulaic to unforgettable. Alright, my dear storyteller, that's all for today. Now, if you're ready to stop blaming structure and start using it as your most powerful tool, hit the like button, subscribe, make sure to download my free guide where you can see the exact structure I use to write Dirty Boy and GUNN. Link is below this video. So let's keep this conversation about storytelling structure going. Next time, I'm going to break down this undeniable structure that I use to create my award-winning scripts. So stay tuned. Until then, keep writing and remember, your story is sacred.